It's always very nice to be able to share what we do. We always joke about the fact that we work on things that nobody's terribly interested in. So any opportunity to share it is a bonus. Yeah, so my aim today is to explain a little bit about what I do. My lovely project postdoc, Sarah, is also here with us in the audience today. So if you have any questions for her afterwards, do feel free to ask. Most of this stuff is actually joint efforts in reality. We work as a team. There are other people who work with us as well. I should say that before starting. Don't want anybody to think this is just my work. So I really want today to kind of introduce the sort of things that we're aiming to do. There we go. It's working on that screen, but not on this. Anyway, never mind. So today, yeah, I just want to think about, under a few headings, the place we're coming from, so the narratives of prehistory that already exist, the ideas about people in the past, which we've been trying to sort of improve the research on, identities in prehistory as a topic, particularly in Turkey, how we can identify identities in prehistory, which is a whole different issue, and then the wider implications. So the fact that actually it doesn't have to just be about prehistory, it could kind of work for anything, to be honest, although I'm, looking at prehistory. So obviously, I'm probably preaching to the converted a bit with this because I'm sure everybody knows about it anyway, but the idea that prehistory is this massive thing that happens, we spend a lot of time looking at data and maps and creating these enormous processes through time of what happened and who went where and what things happened at what times, and I'm sure you've all seen things like this before. This is the lovely Austrian constantly updated map of the spread of the Neolithic from our region all the way across Europe. And these are the kind of narratives that we're used to dealing with. So lots of maps and lots of numbers on bits of paper. Okay, fine, that's lovely, brilliant stuff. And then where does this idea of the big Neolithic story come from? Of course, we're still massively influenced by Gordon Childe and his stories of revolutions, and I'm sure everybody's heard of the Neolithic revolution, the dramatic thing that happens to humankind at some point and changes everything. On the right, you can see the web pages that I captured a few days ago, so it's still alive and well, evidently. However much we don't use it anymore, it's very much out there. And carefully defined with lots of explanations. So there you go. That is the long-lasting effect. But in reality, of course, the Neolithic we think about now, and the bit of prehistory that I look at the most is characterized as a very slow process, which takes many thousands of years and is now talked about in completely different terms. So we don't use the language of revolution anymore. It's much more, probably don't say evolution either, to be honest, but it's a slow process. So I like the title of Trevor's new book, Becoming Neolithic. It implies that it's something that happens over time, which seems much more realistic as a way to approach it. And the things that I look at very much fall into this process. So the core of the things that I'm doing is that this transition to settled life, the famous idea of the hunter-gatherers settling down in one place and gradually changing to living in things that we recognize as villages, in things that we recognize as houses, and building something that resembles the way of life that we live today, in effect. Obviously, we now understand that lots of things didn't happen at the same time. So if we look at this, the things that happened, the things that everybody associates with the Neolithic, explained in lovely icons. The the idea of domesticating plants, the idea of domesticating animals, the idea of domesticating people into their houses slowly. Also, we look at the idea of the genetics, the movements, what happens during this process in the widest sense. What I want to look at a little bit in what I'm talking about is the bit that we actually don't often see. And I thought Lee Clare's lecture really highlighted this. We have a total of 4 skeletons from Göbekli Tepe, which is astonishing on many levels. So we know remarkably little about the people of a lot of these places, actually. And even at Çatalhöyük, where we have vast quantities of Neolithic data, we still know remarkably little about the people themselves and what they were doing. We know more about their genetics, we know things about where they might have come from, what they might have eaten. But in terms of their daily lives, how they related to one another, we know remarkably little. I think it was, for anyone who was in the Arwa lecture last week with Ian Hodder, it sort of was quite obvious that although there's lots of data and lots of individual bits of information, not so much in the way of a coherent picture of who these people were, how they related to each other, what Çatalhöyük was like, maybe in comparison to other settlements. So the idea of different identities in different places, we have very little idea about that. So I want to look at, and through this project and with the people I work with, what these people were doing, who they were, what their lives were like, and how they characterized themselves. So the way they saw themselves and the way they presented themselves to each other is kind of the core of this project. I always use this picture. I've used it a lot in my lectures because it makes you think. It breaks all our expectations, I think, about what people look like and how people behave. And it's a bit of a cautionary tale that we maybe shouldn't essentialize people in the past, because actually, not everybody is the same today either. So it's not a great idea to try and fit everybody in the past into some kind of mold. Obviously, this is a relatively extreme example of a huge amount of different kinds of ornamentation used all at the same time. And obviously, not everybody of any age or gender or sex would do that many different things at the same time. But it helps us to think about the difference between binary interpretations. So the idea of male and female, which has dominated archaeological interpretation of every period forever. Ideas of hierarchy and power and how we structure status through appearance also can be incredibly misleading and are totally understudied in almost every period, I think, probably. You can argue with me about it as well, I don't know. And then we should maybe think about personhood and who people are, more in terms of their social environments, their traditions, and their experiences. Because where you are and what you're doing and who you're with have a profound effect on the way that you behave. In the same way that you think, the difference between being a school pupil, studying at school, and then going to university, your friends change, your entire social environment changes, everything you do, even the food you eat changes, everything changes. That's surely an environmental, social environment effect. So we need to think more widely about where people were and how they were acting, really, rather than essentializing. So Rosemary Joyce has this, I think, incredibly inspiring idea that people experience their world through the body. Obviously, we all live inside our bodies. Experience their bodies through their specific cultural positions. So you can't step outside of the culture that you're in, basically. Whatever that is, and it can change. That can be a completely dynamic thing, and it can be lots of different things. You are in something all the time. And we've approached archaeology more like the things on the right. So we have expectations relating to the Neolithic and what happens in the Neolithic. We have lots of unrecovered artifacts. We have masses of unstudied assemblages, massive geographical inconsistency. Ornaments have always been considered unimportant. They're just not studied at all. So we're never going to find out anything if we don't even look at them, I would say. Massive association with female adornments. Always women wear the nice shiny things. I've lost count of the number of times people have asked me about ladies' lovely shiny things, and I've had to explain to them that's not quite how it works, including pointing out to people, particularly men, who are wearing earrings and telling me that only women wear jewelry, which I've always found. And also typologies which actually don't tell us anything. You can make typologies, you know, great, we have to find a way to talk about things, but a typology on its own will never tell us anything about anything. And the result of this is that we've tended to find exactly what we expect to find. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of a thing. What do I mean by self-fulfilling prophecy? So we have this kind of accepted speculation. I've kind of made up this terminology for it. So accepted speculation and zombie paradigms. So everybody's just said, okay, this is how it was. And we have lots of quotes like this from the well-known articles that have been written about Neolithic ornamentation. Okay, so it's likely that the same green beads that were in charge of improving the crops were also responsible for keeping the well-being of the farmers that raised these crops. And a high cultural value placed on green beads may have affected the eventual development of copper metallurgy. These statements have been widely accepted. Everybody kind of says, oh, okay, Neolithic, fertility stuff, whatever, you know. There's absolutely nothing at all to back up any of the statements on this slide. Nothing, okay? But they are repeatedly quoted everywhere and accepted that, oh, green has some kind of importance because of lovely fertile. They grow plants and plants are green and beads are green, and yeah, that's the interpretation. It's incredibly strange, actually. And when we look at things, so I sort of look at the things that already exist, I suppose. What have we already got in our hands? What are the curious things that got my interest going in this subject? You see things like this. This skeleton and the surrounding things were published quite a long time ago as part of the Chattel book series. And that's fascinating. This building 6, and the sequence of buildings to which it belongs have this tie to these deer canines, but they're not real deer canines. So deer canines are like, they have 2 teeth, which are beautiful. They're like this nice sort of blobby round shape. People choose them. They're very popular. All the way from the Paleolithic onwards. Maybe to do with hunting, pretty things that are available. But here what we have is houses where fake versions of these, for want of a better word, imitation versions of these things, have become associated with a particular house. So they appear in different layers belonging to different people. And it seems that somehow there's this story there that people in this house produce these imitation teeth. And that's their thing. And whether they're trying to fool people or not, I don't know. That's hard to say. It's maybe it is a game of actually, you know, faking things. I know that's a big interpretation. But we see in this example that's been around for many years, as I said, associations between people, activities, and places. Ornaments in the act of making. So those ones are from the same house, but they're unfinished. So that we can see somebody was trying to make them, it never happened. Probably they died, and these were left buried with them in the house. The idea of imitation as a skill, that's a whole different question, obviously. And relationships over time. So people have been doing this for a long time in the same location, for whatever reason. So that's one thing that kind of gets you thinking, and you sort of say, yeah, okay, there's something with this. They're putting a lot of effort into this. Another thing that people, and that I had noticed and that others had noticed, is that we see things like this. Now, these are marine shells, obviously, used as ornaments. right? They're from Bonjukluhuyuk, which is Konya. So it's quite a long way from the sea, really quite a long way from the sea, okay? So any marine products that come to the area have to have been brought there by somebody deliberately somehow. Which is interesting when you're talking about a settled community. You might find that normal for hunter-gatherers who are moving around the landscape, doing their thing. Maybe they visit the Mediterranean, they pick up things. We see it a lot in the Upper Paleolithic, right? It's totally normal. But when they settle down and start building villages, they carry on. They don't start, they carry on doing the same things. So they find ways to organize things so that these same practices can continue. So despite everything else changing, some things really continue. So again, why the Neolithic isn't a revolution. This is one of the things. It's not a revolution. They keep doing their old, very, very old things, in fact, and keep merrily doing it. So we sort of knew about this. Everybody accepted this. This is a thing. It's a great continuity. Great. Okay. Brilliant. And also, this is, let me see if I can change this so I can actually see it. The idea of different things being associated with different people. So Sarah has also been researching people of Ashikla-Huyuk, yet another one of our big Neolithic settlements, and finding out who gets what in their graves, which is a great thing to do, lots of contextual data. And she found early on that when she started looking at these artifacts and skeletons together, that some people had certain things. There's definite associations between some people and certain objects. And interestingly, so these are kind of greenish beads you can see here, and they're associated with both babies and with older people. So the older people of the community, particularly women, and also with the littlest people of the community. And they're kind of used quite often singly, which obviously immediately brings to mind the question of whether these are something like the Nazar Bonjuk. So they're evil, possibly, potentially, maybe evil eye beads of the Neolithic. What do I mean by that? Maybe protection, so aimed at protecting the person who's wearing them. Possibly. When you see things on babies particularly, you always have to be suspicious that that might be the idea, because a single bead, when you wear it, nobody's really going to see it necessarily. It might not be something that is particularly kind of decoration. It might be more of a private usage for the person in question. Just as today in Turkey, babies get their little evil eye beads pinned onto them for protection. Could be something remarkably similar. We don't know, of course. What it does show us, and what Sarah's work has showed us, is that there's a change in status through people's lifetime. So they're not always treated the same, depending on how old they are. It changes gradually. So being old is a different status. Being very little is a different status. And some of these beads also have incredibly long use life. So they're old beads. And a little baby might be given an old bead that's been maybe used and used and used and used and is really worn out, but it's still being passed around or passed down, or we don't know because we don't know who had it before. But these things can be not just new gifts. So it's not just a kind of getting a gift for a new baby type of idea, but something that's passed around or passed on. It's quite an interesting thought. So we had all these general kind of ideas, some hints that really interesting things are happening. So the whole idea of this project is based on this sort of thing. Now this isn't going to change. Why is it not changing now? I apologize, it's died. That's not working either. Anybody? That's it. No, my screen is not matching the thing on the main screen, which doesn't help. Sorry.
Why it's not there?
I don't know. Well done. So then the idea was to start thinking about the idea of identifying identities. So how do you go about doing that? Looks like it's quite a complicated thing, evidently. We've seen lots of different things already. And also how to find the unexpected. So how not to just carry on finding the same things over and over again and saying that it's all related to agriculture and plants. We need to get out of that completely. So there's kind of two ways of approaching it. Macro scale, so big data, putting lots of things together and making a big picture. Micro scale, looking at what happened to individual items and, you know, what their life histories might have been like. We never know for sure, of course. Working. So what does a macro scale view look like? This was, and I would also add that something we've had to deal with, and I'm sure lots of people have to deal with as well, is that data is not always very good. So we have to overcome massively problematic data, okay? We don't have quantification. We don't know how much stuff was excavated. We don't even know if the assemblages we have are representative of anything, to be honest, at most sites. So how do we deal with that? We ended up doing the kind of presence absence thing. So this is shell usage, starting in the Upper Paleolithic, through the Epipaleolithic, then early Neolithic, and then later Neolithic. So a kind of, we also can't do very specific dates because we don't have lovely specific radiocarbon dates from anywhere on the whole. It's incredibly difficult. Apart from maybe Chatham, everywhere else is a bit of a mess. And we literally ended up doing a kind of presence absence. Were they using things? Were they not? And looking at how many kinds of marine shells they were using, how many kinds of freshwater shells they were using, and then what proportion of marine and fresh they were using. So here you can see the proportions. The orange is obviously the freshwater. And what happens, you know, we have very little usage. Freshwater shells are readily available, right? Those are the things that are easy to get. You can find them wherever you want. They're in rivers, lakes, wherever. Everybody has reasonably easy access to shells that can be used for ornaments. They don't use them. I think that we can say with absolute certainty. They choose not to use them. In every period, they're not preferred. Sometimes they use Uchadla, for example, in the Upper Paleolithic. It's great because it has sources of marine and fresh all over the place. They can find them readily. But generally, we have so little usage until you get to the later Neolithic, when you can see clearly, at least, even if you can't see the details, the colours at least, you can see there's far more orange in the last map than in the others. And what we see is a total change in the patterns of usage, which obviously also matches the Neolithic as it's in later periods, the whole Neolithization process moving westwards across Turkey. So it's a really simple technique to document. I'll show you the kind of results of it. I realize you probably can't read this because the writing's far too small, but anyway, look at the nice pictures, and everything changes with time. We look at the later Neolithic, and there's the freshwater shells, and it seems that what we have happening is that they're actually getting their influences from the west and not from the east, which is the opposite of what we expect with the Neolithic process on the whole. So there's a big influx of this shell idea of shell usage in ornamentation that comes not from the east, it never existed in the east, but spreads across from the west and from the Aegean. So it's something that exists in the Aegean and moves across the opposite way, which tells us that, you know, fundamentally in this part of the Neolithic, we've got this kind of two-way traffic thing going on. It isn't all just everybody going towards everybody and everything going towards Europe. It's also some things coming from that direction across the other way, and they're sharing ideas somehow, and different things are becoming fashionable. So this is somebody else's ideas moving around. That's a lovely summary of it. There you go. The wind is blowing from the west, but also the Neolithic is transforming westwards as well. So things are changing on a kind of fundamental level. And again, that's from really basic data and managing to tell a slightly different story with what we already had available to us. So it's just a reinterpretation of existing evidence. On an even bigger scale, and this is a project that's still going on with a lot of colleagues from all the way across Europe, right the way across Europe, from here all the way to Spain, is a pan-Mediterranean case study, but actually also including the European continent as well, on the movement of materials and knowledge. So these things here, they look a bit like dog biscuits, are stone bracelets, right? So solid bangle-like bracelets, one piece, one on a wrist, in varying sizes. These are just typical examples. They're usually found like this, broken into pieces, this reality. And a colleague came to me, somebody from Spain, and says, you know what? We've got exactly the same bracelets over here in Spain that you've got in Turkey. And yeah, I don't think that's a coincidence because they seem to come with the Neolithic. So maybe we should look at this, find out what's going on. So we sat down as the first stage of this. So this is the first stage. We're doing something much more detailed now. Sat down and put together all of the existing data on this stuff from everywhere that we could find. And again, the data's not super great. So we didn't give up. It's still not great data. The dating is not fantastic. The measurements are not good. The recording's generally awful, okay? But we said, okay, what can we do? So we put together every example we could find that has diameters measured. So this is just a graph of diameters of bracelets, okay? So how big are these bracelets? Really simple. And I know you probably can't see, but the red dots on this thing, that represents Italy. And then the other ones, the green ones and the blue ones, are Iberia and Turkey. And you'll notice that the green and the blue ones overlap completely with each other. And Italy is doing something completely else to the other ones. I'm sorry to the Italians in the room. I don't know what you're doing, but they're doing something completely else. Basically. So we said, okay, like there really is something between, the kind of East Mediterranean and the West Mediterranean. There's definitely something going on there. So this was the first attempt at kind of plotting out a map. Dating is so vague. Okay, don't, it's appallingly vague, but it does work. We have to go with it. With the little stars show production sites and the little circles show find sites for stone bracelets. And as you will see, they are everywhere. They're not necessarily well recorded. We have far more in Turkey than this map might indicate, but they are not published. So that's where we are really. But you'll see, and the particularly interesting thing is that all the ones in Iberia are on the eastern side of the Iberian Peninsula, because this is where Neolithic settlers are arriving from. So again, we were really able to show with this that, there's a direct link between the people who are settling in Iberia and the stuff that is also the material culture that's associated with them. And again, it's not a super high-tech study, but it's revealed something that nobody had said before. So it's really interesting. That's the big scale stuff. So that's still carrying on, and we're going to find more results. If we go down to small scale, which is also a lot of what we're doing. This is one of my absolutely favorite artifacts of all time from Jan. In fact, a bit later is Chalcolithic. I'm cheating slightly with this, but just because I like it. It's a freshwater Unio shell. So something you can find anywhere, basically, freshwater oyster, something that is available widely. It has no kind of intrinsic special trade value. It's not exotic. It doesn't do anything special. It's really free. They made this little thing out of it. I don't know what to call the thing. We call it a winged because it looks like it's got two little wings. but we don't know what it symbolizes. There's a whole symbolism surrounding this shape in a number of periods. Nobody has quite decided what it is. Broke, obviously, at a really fragile point where the little wing joins onto the little body bit. And somebody drilled 2 holes to repair it. And they probably just kind of bound it back together. I mean, the string is imaginary, that's my interpretation, but probably they just bound it back together again so they could keep using it. And it gives us a fascinating insight into value, and that characterizing things in terms of material value is not a good game to play. Because if we look at this as a material, as a raw material, it is incredibly dull. You wouldn't say, oh yeah, that's an exotic item, it was traded, it was, there's no story to tell about that material at all. Okay, but somebody cared about it, I think, is the best conclusion we can make. Some person cared about that thing for some reason and took the trouble to try and stick it back together again so they could keep using it. And I think that's a really, really personal story about that little item. We obviously don't know what they were doing with it or who it belonged to. I can't say anything else. The more we looked, actually, the more you can see, you look at things and you say, oh, it's just broken. But actually, things are not always just broken. They can be broken and reused and reused and recycled. And we've got this is one of the most complicated examples I've found. I like it very much. We're still studying it. This thing likely starts out something like that. Okay, so it's a little flat stone. It's tiny, it's about this big. Okay, it's not some kind of massive artifact, it's a tiny little thing. Likely started out as a lovely symmetrical little item, carefully made, shaped and everything else. And somebody has obviously broken it. It's a bit fragile, it's made of stone, it can break if you bash it on something. It's been broken again. It's also been scratched. We don't know what's happened to this. You can see the final version of it in the photograph. It's been scratched and rubbed and scratched some more. And it turned out there's this completely asymmetrical, crazy little thing that bears no resemblance to its original self, but somebody has looked after it for almost whatever reason, maybe for practical purposes, maybe it was useful for something, maybe they were cutting their bits of string on it or something, or maybe because they liked it and they didn't want to throw it away. So this we're still investigating. I mean, there's more I can say about that in future, but not yet. Other examples, so that was a really obvious example, right? Somebody's really looked after it or used it or whatever. But we also have examples that are kind of not so obvious. So when you first look at these ones, you're probably just going to say, yeah, it's a broken bead. It's just, that's it. It looks like nothing. Somebody's thrown it away. But when we look more closely, obviously here, so this is extreme use. Okay, so this bead was this shape originally. It was a nice rounded shape. And it's been so worn by string that it's turned into this kind of H shape. That's entirely caused by string. So somebody's used that thing for like a really long time. The other ones are all obviously completely broken. But the one thing about them is their broken surfaces have been smoothed off after they were broken. The one at the top, you can still put string through it. It still has a little bit of hole left. So you could still hang it up, it would work, it's functional. This one also, you can still use it for that one. That does nothing. It's half a bead. Okay, and it's that whole broken surface has been smoothed over. There's no fresh break there. And I thought maybe, it's possibly just from where it was buried, some kind of taphonomic process, whatever, who knows what happened. But there's lots of these, and they come from all kinds of different places. It's a really regular thing that happens. So again, maybe it was kept in somebody's pocket. Maybe somebody, it was like a little lucky thing. It was a possession, it was whatever. But maybe it was looked after for whatever reason. And it wasn't thrown away, which I think is the most important point, is that they didn't kind of just get rid of stuff, they kept them all. For whatever reason. Interpreting it is super difficult, but they kept using. So how do we try and get into this and understand what was going on? Most of them we can't really do it. We can look at them under the microscope. We can identify where the wear is, how much wear there is, possibly. But we can't really say what happened to them. Some of them, we have these great, but very rare examples, like the other rectangular one I showed you with the millions of broken holes. There's another one here also from Bonjour, which has had a whole series of things scratched into its surface, like just repeatedly. They've kind of made little zigzags and designs and scratches, and then a big groove and some more grooves across the groove, and there's lots of them. So what we've been doing, and what works really well, I can't show you the results because we haven't finished it yet, so another time, is taking silicon molds. Obviously, we can't take the artifacts away from the site. It's not possible, they won't let us. But we can take silicon molds from these. This is dental silicon, and then take it back and look at it, put it under an SCM, and then try and understand the order in which all these things might have happened to this thing. So, we may never know why they did it, but we can work out what happened to it and write a story for it, at least to some extent, I think. So we're still working on these and aiming to get more information like this from different examples. I mean, obviously, I kind of held off going into this because it's sort of the really obvious example of things that are in burials, right? You want to look at identities, you look at stuff that people are buried with. Okay, this is what we all do. It's the classic thing. There's pottery and this and that and weapons and whatever. So the one that got me really interested was quite a long time ago now at Pınarbaşı. This is Epipaleolithic, so it's about 14,000 BC, this burial. And it has an amazing target. I really apologize that there's no photo of this, but there never was a photo. It's incredibly hard to photograph it because it's kind of under a boulder and the stuff is all completely mashed. So you can't take it. Anyway, you have to believe me that it's real. If I didn't make out. It's a burial, so 14,000 BC, but with personal items. This person has this whole kit of stuff. And there's red ochre, there's a little tip of a horn, there's a whole tortoise shell used as a container, which is a really sweet thing. So it's used as a bowl to put the other thing in. There's a shell, there's a groundstone, there's flint, obsidian, some bone beads, some marine shell beads, and a tile knife, which is made from really rough stone. And it looks like this person had, this was their possessions basically buried with them. It's kind of really mundane stuff. It's used. This is not some kind of burial gift of lovely, delightful things. It's just it looks like somebody's personal stuff that they were using. And inside of it are a bunch of beads. They're not on the body. This person was carrying them in their tortoise shell, which is also interesting. Raises questions about whether they were beads in that sense, or maybe they were going to be traded for something else, or, who knows what they were doing with them. But again, Pınarbaşı is on the edge of the Konya Plain. The shells came from the sea. So we see the same kind of, an obsidian obviously comes from Cappadocia, and they've got kind of things from all over the place. So this is the complex details of somebody's life. And I found this, really inspiring as an example. It's incredibly early for this kind of thing anyway. But since we've been lucky enough, this is much later, but still very early Neolithic, at the site of Bonjour, this article came out last week. It's incredibly fresh. And it's something fascinating and completely new, and something specifically from burials, which is the first piercings, probably in the world, that we know of. And all these tiles I've been trying to tell the world for the last week. It's completely out of control. But I was trying to say it was the earliest ones in Western Asia, but it's all got a bit, it's all got a bit crazy. But what they are, these are sort of fairly familiar forms. So labrets to be worn here, and then various forms of earrings, including these. So these are obsidian cord that have been smoothed out and stuck through people's ears. Quite fat. It's a bit painful sounding. It's a bit of a process to do this. You wouldn't want to try and do it all at once. It would hurt a lot. Obviously, they're quite large as well. They're long like this and quite. Especially these ones would be inordinately painful, I would imagine. They rub against your teeth as well. So the thing that for us was crucial was that we could show this tooth wear. So people were wearing these when they were alive, definitely, we can say that. And they've got these horrible scratches on their teeth as well from having basically stones scratching against their front teeth all the time, which is incredibly horrible sounding, but they did it. Poor skeletons are in a horrible state, I'm afraid. So that's what they look like. You have to sort of imagine where the head and the ear is, but you have to take my word for it that the things are located, in the right places on the bodies. And some people are wearing, 2 earrings and a big piercing here as well at the same time. Incredibly cool. We don't get to find this is find of a lifetime. I don't think that's going to happen again somehow. It's amazing. You can read that in antiquity or everywhere on the internet, apparently. This is one that Thomas wrote. The mysterious portable symbolism issue of the knit. There's lots more work to be done on this, but what we also want to emphasize, and this is partly the small things, big stories idea, was that it isn't all about Göbekli and the massive monumental things, but actually there's a lot of symbolism on a tiny little scale. It isn't all the big massive animals and huge, monumental, massive designs and people with statues and everything else. We have tiny, tiny scale symbolism and from masses of sites across a huge area of, the Fertile Crescent, let's say, including southeast Turkey, and including this astonishing example of a big stone. So it's a big thing, something like this, that was on a wrist, and it's massively decorative. We're talking about very earliest Neolithic here. So with the very first settled villages in southeast Turkey. And they made this thing, it's bone inlaid with stone pieces. And they've cut out all the little bits. We don't know how they were stuck on. It's in the museum. We can't analyze the materials. Unfortunately, this is the usual story. So we don't know what the glue is, unfortunately. But somehow they've stuck these bits onto the surface of the bone. The object itself is great, but there's a bigger story to be told about what's the difference between symbolic things you can move around and take with you. When you go somewhere, it comes with you. And then the symbolic, massive things that do not move and stay in one place. So you have to visit that. It's 2 different sort of ideas of Neolithic symbolism. And it's an interesting one. And we don't understand it. There's an enormous road to go, but this is all food for thought. And I don't have any amazing conclusions about it yet. But, think about it and we'll see. Wider implications. Have I been talking for too long, by the way? No. Okay. Last thing. So I mentioned wider implications. It doesn't just work for the Neolithic. The Neolithic is interesting. And that's my job most of the time, but it also works for other stuff. So I've been lucky enough to work on the amazing material Sumbaşıryük. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. Yeah? Seen it in classes, maybe, I don't know. But it's another one of the Ulusu Dam projects, just like Boncuklu Tarla is. It's also like Boncuklu Tarla, not under the water. So, yay for archaeology. But it also has truly, truly astonishing Bronze Age stone. I think, okay. Truly astonishing Bronze Age graves, which you may have seen, they've been presented quite a lot. So I've been working on these in the sense of going back to identities. What can we say about these early Bronze Age people who had masses of stuff? And this grave is the one that's had the most study so far. It's called 15 and 17. Obviously, you recognise the stone cyst. Okay, fine, that's normal. But there's also lots of these little skeletons, these kind of smudgy looking things over here, piled up against the side of the grave, which is a weird and fascinating thing. So the current theory is that there are two 12-year-olds buried inside of the grave, young, okay? And outside the chamber are the 8 youngsters, okay? So between 12 and 18 years of age. Again, male and female. There's no sort of sex differentiation here. It's not like we have one important person buried inside, associated with a certain place. So mixed. The current interpretation is that these people on the outside were sacrificed to go with the people on the inside for whatever reason. And what I wanted to do was see what the ornaments look like in relation to that. Incredibly fun thing to do. So what does it look like? Looks like this. So this is inside the grave. This is in the stone bit, and that's outside. Okay, so these are the sacrificed people, and these are the hypothetically important grave people. Okay, and the hypothetically important grave people have, you can see quite clearly, much more colourful items with them. You know, don't need any skill to spot that. That was the first observation. They've got a lot more shiny things with them. They have 6,710 beads with them in total, which is enormous, obviously. That's a massive amount of stuff. But it's also incredibly high quality. It comes from all over the place. We have beads that likely come from the Indus. We have early faience beads that, you know, really nice and early. We have all of these materials, particularly rock crystal and related quartz materials, which are really hard to make stuff out of, right? It's a hard project to work with these. You don't want to go into this lightly. It takes time. It's incredibly tedious. So that's one thing, okay? That's what it looks like when you're the important person. On the other side, 8 people, okay? 24,157 bit specific beads. As you can see, they look completely different, right? Totally different things. And they look like this. So you can't really understand from when I just show random little photos. But they're all arranged like this. What it looks very much like, they're made out of incredibly soft stuff. So talc, steatite. You can practically cut it with your fingernail. Okay, it is so soft, right? You don't need any skill to do this at all. And they're not very well finished. They made a specific set of types. Okay, so this is where we can have a typology. It's useful for someone. They're all typology, and they all fit together. You have to thread the strings in a particular way to make the pattern work, otherwise it doesn't come out right. These are mass produced, so we have a look around. They are everywhere in the early world. There are masses of them all over the place. They're in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria, all over the place, right? And well, what's going on here? There's masses of them and there's 8 people. I mean, the obvious interpretation, obviously, is that, you know, when you look at it all nicely cleaned up like this, these are some kind of uniform. These people all have the same stuff with them. Every single one. They're not all identical, so they look really identical. These are to scale. One of them is clearly massive compared to the other one, but they're exactly the same, but just built to a completely different scale. I don't know why. And some of them you can see here really clearly are quite used because the material's so soft, right? It just gets really worn out. So these ones are now you can see the grooves here from where they've been rubbing against the other beads. So those we can say are nice. And some of them are utterly fresh. They've never been, those holes are completely new, never been used at all. So again, you know, why some people have old ones and other people have new ones. Maybe new sets, newly appointed members of this, whatever it is that's going on here. We're just debating this and trying to, you know, write it up. It's incredibly unclear what happens in the very earliest Bronze Age in Southeast Turkey. There is no, I think, fantastic story. We compare them to Arslan Tepe, fine, but it's not exactly the same thing. It's kind of, a little bit similar to something that's going on elsewhere, but not really, there's nothing that you can directly compare to it. So again, it's more slightly unanswered questions, but really interesting. But it's given us a whole different perspective on these graves. In the graves with these people are mountains of spears, huge numbers of pots, or the richest kind of stuff that you can possibly imagine, but also these much more personal items, which I think are fascinating. And the only items that the people outside the grave get are ornaments. They don't get other stuff. So, you know, whatever, whoever they are, their little uniforms or whatever they are were what they got. And they didn't get the fancy stuff that the people inside did. But all of them are incredibly young. So it's not like they're sort of rulers or some kind of, you know, accrued wealth or, you know, things they've won in battle or something like this. It's just not possible. These are 12-year-olds, you know, they're still kids basically. So this again is an ongoing thing. I don't have any solution. We'll see what happens. There are far more graves to look at, so maybe we're going to find like better stories about it as we go along as well, hopefully. And something else, just one very last thought. In these same graves, we have these things, which I'm almost certain are beads from the Chalcolithic that they picked up from the underlying layers and reused. So they're kind of scavenging things that are quite fun and just reusing them. You can see, a bit like the other examples, they're super worn out, right? So we see exactly the same thing we see in the Neolithic here, but this is in the Bronze Age. Super worn out beads, they've been used for a long time, and they don't match the things we see in the Bronze Age at all. They're of a completely different world. The shapes are different, the materials are different, nothing is the same. And on a similar note, we also have an obsidian blade that's been recycled into a pendant. Again, not really part of the lives of these early Bronze Age people at all. They probably found it somewhere and thought it was quite interesting and decided to use it because I'm looking at it like this. So these artifacts have even more interesting life histories that kind of just, you know, go back to goodness knows when. We don't even know where they came from. So yeah, going forward, we're going to do more of this stuff. This is the plan, and build bigger stories, basically. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing this fascinating. So we have some questions. I think that John
was wonderful lecture, highly inspiring. A brief comment on the sorry. I have a brief remark of the island which were what you mentioned at the beginning with this giant beads and things that they associate with women. Well, in the European island age, it's exactly the other way around. There's all these highly adorned men in the with tons of gold jewelry and earrings and most fascinating makeup. So that makeup kills tweezers and stuff, but it's always associated, I mean, a lot of people made it. So they were adorned and painted and highly adorned with earrings and other stuff. Not the king.
Yes.
Thank you.
Published. It was in the, again, it was in the news about lipstick. They reported it as lipstick.
Yeah.
If anybody saw it. Females, everything. It's really not. We don't know. We have no idea. So yeah.
Thank you.
one. about and about Chaldees. Often we found shell temperature.
Yes.
In the slides that these